She was just another homeless woman on the sidewalk until Hillary Clinton stopped mid-speech, walked through security, and held her hand. What happened next stunned the world. Washington, D.C. woke up to the cold grip of winter. Tourists hurried past Lafayette Park, their coats zipped up, their eyes glazed over. Just beside the statue of Andrew Jackson, where pigeons huddled for crumbs, a woman sat wrapped in what looked like remnants of an old floral blanket. Her name was Rachel Moore, though no one asked. Her skin was windburned, her shoes mismatched. She had been there for weeks, perhaps longer. People passed. No one stopped. Rachel had once been a librarian in Vermont. A car crash had taken her husband and left her with mounting bills and a broken hip. Insurance didn't cover it all. Grief drowned her. She moved to D.C. hoping for a restart, but city life was merciless to those without shelter or a plan. This morning, she stared at the steam rising from a nearby food truck. The vendor, a kind man named Marcus, occasionally gave her coffee. But today he didn't see her. The crowd was swelling. Secret Service agents moved in waves. Something or someone important was coming. From her corner, Rachel saw the flashing motorcade glide to a stop across the street. She blinked slowly. The banner on the event stage read, "Justice, Humanity, and Hope, a call to action." She didn't recognize the name printed below until the crowd parted. The figure that stepped onto the stage was Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton had returned to the city not for politics, but for purpose. She had stepped back from public office, but not from public service. Her speech was simple, not rehearsed. No grand slogans, just a plea for America to remember its soul. She spoke of forgotten veterans, of struggling single mothers, and of people who went unseen in the very shadows of government buildings. And that's when she saw Rachel. Mid-sentence, Hillary paused. Her eyes shifted beyond the crowd, toward the woman bundled near the bench. To many, she was just another homeless person. But Hillary's gaze lingered. Something about Rachel's posture, her folded hands, her attempt to look smaller than the wind, tugged at something deeper. The crowd waited for her next words, but she stepped back from the mic. Security stiffened. A ripple of confusion passed through the attendees. Then Hillary Clinton, the former Secretary of State, walked down the steps, straight toward Rachel. Rachel looked away, embarrassed. She didn't want charity. She didn't want pity. She had stopped hoping years ago. But Hillary knelt, gently, softly. Without a word, she extended her hand. Rachel hesitated. The cameras clicked. Phones came out. Journalists whispered. But no one moved. It was as if the world had held its breath. Rachel reached out, not because she believed, but because she was tired of being unseen. Her fingers were cold, her palms cracked from the weather. Hillary's hand was warm, steady. She didn't flinch. She didn't fake a smile. She said nothing for several seconds, just held the woman's hand as if it were the most important task in her life. And in that moment, it was. A silence fell over the crowd. Some felt tears rise without knowing why. Others lowered their phones, realizing this wasn't just a photo op. It wasn't planned. It wasn't political. It was human. Rachel finally spoke, not in words, but in a tremble. A single tear broke loose and fell onto her cheek. "Why?" she managed to ask. Hillary looked her in the eye. "Because you matter." Those 3 words were barely audible, but someone near the stage had captured them on a mic. Within minutes, the clip hit every major platform. News anchors stumbled to describe it. Hashtags exploded. You Matter trended globally. That night, as Rachel sat in a clean bed provided by a city shelter, arranged quietly by Hillary's team, she whispered those words again. You matter. And for the first time in years, she believed them. Rachel Moore had slept in countless doorways, under bridges, in emergency rooms pretending to wait for someone who'd never come. But that night, she lay on a mattress, thin but soft. Clean sheets. A blanket that smelled of detergent, not mildew. Her pillow was stiff, but it cradled her head like kindness she hadn't known in years. She didn't sleep easily. The fluorescent hallway light buzzed all night. Her body ached from the cold it had absorbed for weeks, but something else kept her awake. hope. She didn't remember the last time she felt it. Not after losing her husband, her job, her home, but Hillary Clinton's touch, that brief, warm connection, had done something. It hadn't handed her a new life, but it reminded her that she was still alive, and that she still mattered. At dawn, she sat by the shelter's cafeteria window and drank hot coffee. Her hands trembled, not from withdrawal, but from the unfamiliar comfort of safety. A young volunteer approached. "You're the woman in the video," he said gently. "We've had donations pouring in for you. Clothes, food, even job offers. You inspired people." Rachel blinked. The last time she'd felt important, she was reading bedtime stories to neighborhood kids. That was 10 winters ago. Now the world was watching her, for holding someone's hand. Back at her Georgetown home, Hillary Clinton sat in silence as her phone vibrated nonstop. Calls from global leaders, texts from strangers, interview requests. From every outlet imaginable. But she ignored most of them. What mattered wasn't the attention. It was the quiet message she'd sent with her gesture. That night after the speech, her team had tried to rush her back to the car, citing safety. But Hillary insisted on staying. She had sat next to Rachel while staff scrambled for a plan. She asked for nothing, no cameras, no interviews. Just wanted Rachel to know someone still saw her. The backlash was swift, too. Some commentators accused her of staging the moment. Others said she was chasing relevance, but those voices drowned beneath a sea of empathy. Churches reached out, college students raised funds. Even children in classrooms across the country sent letters with "You Matter" written in crayon. Somewhere in Ohio, a middle school teacher paused her lesson to play the clip for her class. She wept halfway through. Her students, many from broken homes, sat frozen. That simple act had become more than a gesture. It was now a symbol. By the end of the week, Rachel had clothes that fit, shoes without holes, and a room of her own in a transitional home. She was still hesitant, still adjusting. Kindness, when you've gone so long without it, can feel like a trick. A counselor named Megan helped her apply for medical treatment and assisted her with therapy sessions. Slowly, Rachel began to open up. She shared stories of Vermont winters, of her late husband's love for jazz, of her dream to work in libraries again. Then came a call. A nonprofit library project in Baltimore offered her part-time work, just sorting donated books. It wasn't much, but to Rachel it felt like a door cracking open. Her hands still bore scars. Her knees still ached from years on the concrete. But when she walked into that library on her first day, she stood tall. Her name tag read, Rachel. Moore, volunteer librarian. Cameras followed her occasionally, though she tried to ignore them. The shelter director said she had the right to ask for privacy. But Rachel didn't mind so much anymore. If people saw her and remembered the thousands still like her, still unseen, then maybe it was worth it. That evening, she sat on the library steps and watched the sun go down over a quiet street. A little girl passed by and waved. Rachel smiled. In her pocket, she still carried a note. Written on White House stationery, it read, "Your story reminded me why I began this journey. Keep walking, Rachel. You're not invisible anymore." HC spring arrived early in Baltimore that year. Trees bloomed with defiance, and the city's breeze lost its bite. Rachel Moore once, folded into a shadow on the Capitol lawn, now stood behind a podium. Her hair was combed back in a soft bun. Her eyes, once dulled by years of wind and pavement, held a quiet shine. It was a charity event titled From Unseen to Unstoppable. She hadn't agreed at first. Speaking publicly still made her stomach turn. But the organizers, many of them women who had been through homelessness, abuse, addiction, said her story had lit a fire in them, that she gave them permission to hope. The room was small, no teleprompters, no press cameras, just humans, sitting, shoulder to shoulder, waiting for a reason to believe again. Rachel looked at her trembling hands, then took a deep breath. "I was forgotten," she began. "But someone saw me. Not because I had anything left to give, but because she remembered I once did. And that meant I still could." She didn't mention Hillary by name, She didn't need to. The audience already knew. They didn't clap. They stood. Because sometimes silence carries more respect than noise. A week later, Rachel sat in her modest one-bedroom apartment. There was a plant by the window, a shelf full of secondhand books, and a photo of her late husband framed beside her. Lamp. The doorbell rang. She opened it to find Hillary Clinton standing on the steps. No media, no entourage. Just her. Dressed in a plain gray coat, holding a small basket of croissants and orange juice. "I was in town," she smiled. "Thought I'd check on my friend." Rachel laughed, a sound even she hadn't heard from herself in years. They sat at her small kitchen table sipping tea. They spoke about books, about the smell of libraries, about what it means to remember someone who thinks they've been erased. Rachel asked her, "Do you ever regret leaving the spotlight?" Hillary leaned back, her gaze soft. "Not for one. Second, I never needed the spotlight. I just wanted to be useful." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that doesn't press but comforts. Before she left, Hillary placed her hand gently over Rachel's once again. "You've done more than I ever could. You changed hearts without a microphone." Rachel whispered, "Because you held my hand first." Months passed. Life settled. Rachel continued volunteering at the library. She eventually started a community program, second chapter, helping homeless women rediscover skills, apply for jobs, and reconnect with family. But the photo, the one the world couldn't stop sharing, remained timeless. It showed a cold morning, a crowded plaza, a woman wrapped in an old blanket, and a stateswoman kneeling before her, offering a hand instead of a speech. That image was framed in museums, studied in classrooms, and printed on murals in low-income neighborhoods. But Rachel kept her own copy tucked inside her journal, not for fame, but to remind herself that love doesn't need lights or applause. It just needs presence. And in a world that moved too fast to see its weakest, one quiet moment between two women, one broken, one powerful, had slowed time, had shifted perception, had taught a planet to look again, because sometimes it isn't policy or power that changes the world. It's just one hand reaching for another, and the world, for once, watching in silence. It had been nearly a year since. That cold morning when a former First Lady knelt and held the hand of a woman no one else saw. Now Rachel Moore stood inside the U.S. Capitol, not as a forgotten figure in the shadows, but as a guest of honor. The invitation had come unexpectedly. A congressional committee on homelessness had requested her testimony. Her name had echoed through humanitarian networks, and now lawmakers wanted her story firsthand. She wore a modest blazer and carried no speech, just a folded note Hillary Clinton had once written her. The marble halls, which once felt alien, now echoed her footsteps with respect. When her name was called, she stepped to the microphone. Senators sat in rows, suited and skeptical. She looked around, took a breath, and began. "I'm not a politician. I'm a statistic that lived to talk back," she said. "You debate bills, budgets, and borders. I slept under your bridges." No applause followed, only silence. But it was the kind that listened. By the next morning, headlines had split like a cracked mirror. Some praised Rachel's raw truth as a wake-up call. Others labeled her a puppet of elites. One senator, Gerald Roth, known for opposing social spending, went on air. "This is just emotional theater. We cannot run a country on hugs and handouts." Rachel saw the clip on a diner TV. Her hands clenched the mug of coffee, her heart sinking. She wasn't a politician. She had no PR team, no counter-narrative, just her truth. But someone had her. Back hours later, Hillary Clinton tweeted, "Some speak from pulpits. Others speak from scars. I'll take the latter any day. Rachel matters." The tweet went viral. Suddenly, the narrative flipped. Citizens flooded Gerald Roth's office with letters. Veterans, teachers, parents, all saying they had once felt unseen too. The backlash to the backlash became its own movement. Rachel didn't ask for a revolution, but her presence had become one. Late that night, Rachel sat on her small couch reading a letter. Not Hillary's, this one came from a 12-year-old girl named Nia from Detroit. Dear Miss Rachel, we watched your video in school. I didn't think grown-ups could be scared like me, but you were. And you still stood up. I want to be like you. Tears welled in Rachel's eyes. She hadn't set out to be anyone's hero. But here she was, showing the next generation that surviving was strength, and scars could speak louder than suits. As she folded the letter, she smiled faintly. In that moment, she understood something. Power didn't come from standing tall, it came from standing anyway. The more Rachel Moore spoke, the louder the world listened, and so did those who wanted her silenced. A week after her Capitol testimony, a tabloid headline emerged. Homeless to hero, Rachel Moore's past raises questions. Inside were photos. From her time in Vermont, spun cruelly. Unpaid bills, eviction notices, a hospital report from her breakdown after her husband's death. They painted her as unstable, untrustworthy. Rachel sat frozen on her apartment floor, the paper crumpled in her hands. All she had worked for, the trust she was building, now seemed fragile. The whispers spread. News anchors debated whether her story had been exaggerated. Late-night hosts turned her into punchlines. But that evening, as Rachel stood to turn off her phone for good, a knock came to her door. It was Hillary Clinton again. No cameras, no press. Just her, and a silent show of solidarity. You don't hide when the storm comes, Hillary said gently. You hold your ground. Days later, a press conference was announced in front of a women's shelter Rachel had once stayed in. Reporters assumed Hillary would speak. But instead, she walked to the mic, then stepped aside. America needs to hear from the people it forgot, she said. Rachel walked up. Her voice trembled, but only for a moment. Yes, I had breakdowns. Yes, I lost everything. I was human. I am still human. And no smear changes that. Flashbulbs burst. Reporters jotted notes. But for once, they weren't shaping the narrative. Rachel was. That speech went viral again, but this time, it didn't fade. A billionaire anonymously funded a new foundation in Rachel's name, The Hand That Holds, a support network for women rebuilding their lives. Rachel didn't ask for power, but now she had it, and wielded it with the softness that had once saved her. Weeks passed, then months. Rachel's story stopped being viral. It became legacy. She appeared on educational panels, partnered with churches and clinics, and visited shelters not as a symbol, but as a sister. Each time she asked one question: what do you need to feel seen again? In one city, a pregnant teen hugged her. In another, a man recovering from addiction showed her the first poem he had written in years. Her greatest moment came quietly, in a courthouse, where she sat beside a woman named Vanessa, fighting to get her children back. When Vanessa's knees buckled before the judge, Rachel reached out and held her hand. The bailiff didn't interfere. The judge paused. It was all too familiar. One woman, steadying another, one hand, reminding the other it mattered. The courtroom fell into silence. Again. It was a cool morning in Vermont, the kind where sunlight filters through trees like quiet blessings. The town Rachel Moore had once fled from now welcomed her back, with camera crews, community leaders, and quiet faces that remembered her, yet hardly recognized the woman she had become. In the center of the gathering stood a new building. Simple, clean, with ivy still growing along its brick edges. The sign above the door read, "The Daniel Moore House, a shelter for women and hope." It bore the name of Rachel's late husband. She hadn't spoken much about him. Daniel had been a teacher, a man with soft eyes and a gift for restoring broken chairs and people. After the crash, Rachel had nearly erased him from her memory, because remembering hurt too much. But now, she wanted his name to stand for something. As she cut the ribbon, her hands trembled. Not from nerves, but reverence. He believed in starting over, she said. Now this house will help others do just that. Inside, the Daniel Moore house was a world apart from cold shelters Rachel had known. Each room had soft lighting, a reading nook, a place to dream. The walls were painted with calm colors, sage green, ocean blue. In the common room hung framed quotes from women of all backgrounds. Your past is not a prison. Being broken doesn't mean being discarded. Rachel made it a rule that every woman who entered was welcomed by name. Not a number, not a case file. They came. Mothers fleeing violence, teens lost in the system, elderly women who had no one left. And Rachel, once one of them, now became the hand at the door. She didn't play savior. She didn't act above them. She sat with them, listened, remembered. That was her power. That was her ministry. One afternoon, as spring broke through Vermont's frost, Rachel walked the garden behind the shelter. It had been Daniel's dream to grow tomatoes and lavender there one day. She knelt beside a bed of soil, planting new seeds when she heard a voice behind her. You still kneel with people, Hillary Clinton said with a warm smile, stepping into view. Rachel stood, brushing her hands. And you still show up at the right time. The two women walked in silence, admiring the garden. It wasn't just friendship that bound them. It was the shared knowledge of what it means to carry others, to believe in invisible worth. I've been asked why I did what I did that day, Hillary said, but I never gave them the full answer. Rachel turned. What was it? Hillary looked out across the flowers. Because I saw myself in you. And I hoped someone would do the same if I were ever sitting alone. Rachel's eyes glistened. In that moment, they weren't icons, not headlines, just women who believed in reaching down to lift someone up. And once again, one hand quietly found the other. It was late autumn in Philadelphia, the wind restless and streets damp from a light drizzle. Outside the city library, a girl no older than 16 sat on the stone steps, clutching a threadbare coat. Her eyes were hollow with the kind of fear that made you forget your own name. People passed, some slowed, none stopped, until a woman with graying hair and soft eyes approached. She wore a warm wool coat and carried a cloth bag filled with donated books. Rachel Moore sat down beside the girl. No questions, no judgment, just quiet company. After a long moment, the girl whispered, "They told me shelters are full." Rachel reached into her coat and handed the girl a card. It had no logo, just a handwritten name and a number. Second chapter program. You matter. Rachel Moore. The girl looked at it like a lifeline. Why are you helping me? Rachel smiled, gently. Because someone once held my hand when the world had turned its back. Now it's my turn. Months later, the Daniel Moore House hosted its annual celebration. Former residents returned with children, job badges, and stories etched into smiles. One woman had become a social worker. Another opened a bakery. A few had reconnected with family. All had walked through hell and come out holding hope. In the main hall stood a new addition, the Wall of Hands. Dozens of handprints, painted in vibrant colors, lined the wall. Underneath each was a name. Not of donors or staff, but of every woman who had ever stayed there. Rachel stood before it, her own hand pressed into lavender paint, her palm now a permanent part of the mural. She didn't need awards. This was her legacy. The room fell silent when a new resident stepped forward, cradling her infant. She approached Rachel, eyes misted. I don't know who you are to the world, she said softly, but to me, you were the first person who saw me as a mother, not a mistake. Rachel hugged her tightly, her eyes closed. Sometimes the deepest healing doesn't come from speeches. It comes from being seen. Years passed. Rachel aged gracefully, still working quietly, never stepping back into the chaos of cameras. Her story was told in classrooms, in shelters, even in a children's book titled The Day a Hand Changed the World. And one day, the Smithsonian unveiled a permanent exhibit, Compassion in Leadership. At its center stood a life-sized photograph mounted under soft lights. It showed two women, one kneeling, the other sitting, their hands clasped like a bridge, Hillary Clinton and Rachel Moore. A plaque read, "This moment didn't change policy, it changed people, because sometimes the most powerful act is simply seeing someone and staying beside them." Rachel didn't attend the unveiling, She was busy planting tomatoes in the garden. But that evening back home, she received a letter, handwritten, elegant, and aged. It was Hillary's. It read, "I may have given you my hand once, Rachel, but you gave it back to the world 1,000 times over. Thank you for reminding us what mercy looks like when it moves." Rachel sat quietly, folded the letter, and placed it beside the first one Hillary ever gave her. Outside, a bird landed on the garden fence. And inside, a woman who had once been forgotten was now unforgettable.